Rise up, ye saints of God, and now in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. So we've just heard this short gospel that really first gives us a hint about increasing our faith, and second of all, asks us to simply be satisfied with doing what we ought to do. So, doing what we ought to do. Sounds formidable, doesn't it? Too often the idea we get about oughts are tied to our early life experiences, sometimes of shame or blame. Does it remind you when I talk about what you ought to do of your parent shaking a finger at you? Like when you're caught with your hand in the cookie jar right before dinner. No words are necessary. We know what we ought to be doing. We just have difficulty doing it. My fifth grade teacher, Mr. Law, an interesting name for a fifth grade teacher, drummed into us that there should be no reward for doing the right thing or doing what we ought to do. You know, like finding someone's wallet in the cafeteria, we should take it to the office. No thanks, no reward, just doing what is right. And when it comes to standards, I think we all know that, like, we should not lie, cheat, or steal. We probably learned that in kindergarten or before. And so when it comes to the church context, when we think of oughts, what do we think of first? The 10 Commandments? Those 10 guidelines for faithful living handed down to a group of Israelites who were wandering the desert for 40 years and were trying like the dickens to get along and trying to listen to God? You know, we remember those. Love God first and most, make no idols, don't take God's name in vain, remember the Sabbath, honor your father and mother, do no murder, no adultery, don't steal or bear false witness or covet. Right? Is that what we ought to do? Here's a New Yorker cartoon for you. So clearly Moses has set his staff aside on a ledge near the top of Mount Sinai. God is up here in the corner. Either God's voice or God's shining glory is emanating from the corner. And Moses is holding those 2 tablets that we often hear about and saying to God, so basically, this is all about what you want. How much of what we ought to do is what we want to do? What does it take to actually want what we really need? You know, there's several prayers that we say. This first prayer that we say every Sunday morning is called our collect. And so there's several collects throughout the year that really call upon God to help us attain this sense of an integrated heart where what we want to do is also what we ought to do. And so listen just a minute to a couple of them that we've heard recently. Grant that we may think those things that are right, and by thy merciful guiding may perform the same. Grant that we may both perceive and know what things we ought to do, and also may have grace and power faithfully to fulfill the same. Grant to us, Lord, the Spirit to think and do always such things as are right. In a way, we're pleading with God to give us an undivided heart, a heart wherein what we ought to do and what we want to do line up, and therefore our faith can be expressed in our actions. But that's not so easy, is it, to achieve an undivided heart? Jesus in today's gospel makes practicing one's faith, increasing it even, sound easy. and also makes us think that doing faithfully what we ought to do, what we're called to do, is just the way things are. But my own experience is that faithful living is not so easy. It requires an inner dialogue with oneself and an ongoing conversation with God and with others. I think it also requires a community such as ours. We live in a world full of noise and visual distractions, and it is into that cacophony of sight and sound that today I want to add my voice to what it is that you're seeing and hearing. So, have you seen the banner that's stretched across the entrance to the parish hall? Did some people stop there before they came? It says, "Shining our light." And it's our theme of our annual appeal this year. It's our rallying cry to raise awareness and to raise funds for next year's budget. But with today's lessons, it makes me wonder what we ought to do with regard to our commitment of financial resources to this church. How is it that we are to act faithfully? It makes me wonder, how important is this place, and what difference does St. John's make in our life? Perhaps this week some of you saw in one of your media sources the courtroom scene from the trial of the Dallas policewoman who, having entered into her neighbor's apartment thinking it was her own, thinking her neighbor was an intruder, pulled her gun and shot the man through the heart. Her name is Amber Geiger. His name was Botham Jean. She is 31 years old. He was 26 years old. Both so young. And in an instant, his life ended and hers changed forever. She was sentenced on Thursday to 10 years in prison. What is unremarkable about this story is that on any day, any of us could be him or her. Just pause for a minute the next time you are sitting eating a bowl of ice cream and imagine what it was like to be him. Or when you have been so tired that you come home from work and you can't even find your keys, or so distracted by good or ill that you literally forget where you are. Think of her. We could have been either one of them. What also is unremarkable, sadly, is that this crime and punishment has ignited a firestorm of controversy about racial profiling, hugging in courtrooms, judges giving Bibles, and white folks getting lighter sentences for killing black folks than black folks get for killing white folks. But we're not going to go there today. What is remarkable about this story is forgiveness. The forgiveness that was revealed in the courtroom at Amber's sentencing on Thursday. Brant Jean, Botham's younger brother, spoke about his faith and forgiving Amber, and then he tearfully paused and asked the judge if he could hug her, which, advisedly or not, the judge allowed. While others were outside the courtroom gearing up to protest such a light sentence for such an unnecessary murder, an 18-year-old brother was showing us how he practiced his faith, a faith that I think could uproot a mulberry tree and have it planted in the sea. Brant Jean quieted the noise around him and drew on the strength of his faith, trusting God to increase it. Now, I imagine that it has taken a long time and a lot of sleepless nights, much prayer, study, and reflection for Brant during this year since his brother's murder to get to the place of forgiveness. Some, perhaps most people, never do forgive or get over such trauma. And I believe also that it must have taken a community of faith, a church like ours, a family that was practiced in the art of forgiveness, to have given him the foundation and the strength to overcome his own grief and pain and to reach out to Amber, literally hating what she had done, but choosing to bear no ill will, choosing to reach out in love and in the confidence that she too is a child of God and God is not done with her yet. Justice and mercy can coexist. They did on Thursday in that courtroom in Texas. Now, I do think it is important for us to understand that there is a racial dynamic in these patterns of forgiveness that we encounter most often here in the U.S. in our Christian churches with our black brothers and sisters. I am reminded of the outpouring of forgiveness that happened after Dylan Roof, a white supremacist, killed so many in a Bible study in Emmanuel Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. It's important for us to acknowledge the complex reasons that often have made our black brothers and sisters the wise leaders of the forgiveness movement in the Christian church in the United States. It's important for us to consider how it is that they seem to be so quick and so able to choose to forgive and love. Roxanne Gay, writing an editorial in the New York Times after Emmanuel Church's powerful public forgiveness of Dylan Roof's murder, calls all of us to move beyond our sentimental blur and reminds us that for 400 years, since the dawn of African slavery on this continent, for sheer survival, our black brothers and sisters of slave heritage have been practicing forgiveness for their own survival. To get up and work the next day after an unjust travesty, to stay alive, serving in the fields and homes of masters who had the power to rip their lives apart. They had to learn how to forgive. They had to rid themselves of their grief and hate. It was a necessity. So they may have 400 years of a head start on all of us who today find forgiveness difficult. But I also would say that God and faith and community had a lot to do with their well-developed capacity to forgive. I would say that God can meet us wherever we are, and whether for survival or because it is the right thing to do, God can take any circumstances and teach us to forgive and love. But I would submit that it is only those people who have been actively practicing forgiveness all of their lives, who find themselves surrounded by a community that supports that works with them in forgiveness. Only those who are practiced are able, within hours of a brutal murder of a pastor and dear friends, are able to stand and pray and beg God for mercy on such a murderer as Dylan Roof. It takes practice, my friends, lifelong practice, to learn how to forgive and love. I remember being really angry at one point in my church career, well, maybe other points, but this one, feeling almost hopeless and certainly powerless about some circumstances that I was encountering. And I thought to myself, where can I go to seek wisdom from someone in the church who loves the church as much as I do, but surely has experienced disappointments worse than mine in the churches not living up to its calling. And so it was to a black clergy brother that I went and spilled my soul for guidance. He recognized my pain and my deep desire to continue to worship God and love Jesus and serve the church. He also accurately recognized that I needed to identify the places within myself wherein I needed deep forgiveness before I could deeply forgive any others. He noticed that I needed practice in this forgiveness business. I will never forget his just sitting before me, so full of joy after so many hardships, and so ready to forgive and forgive and forgive. His life for me was literally the definition of hope. There's this other New Yorker cartoon. There's this older gentleman in some skyscraper in New York sitting in front of a young man that clearly is just out of college or just out of graduate school seeking employment. And the older gentleman is off asking that obligatory question that interviewers ask interviewees. And finally, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And the bubble above the young man's head is the top third of the Empire State Building above the water that has submerged most of the other buildings in New York City. And he's balanced on a log, paddling in the water. It's enough to make him wonder, I wonder what getting this job is all about, if in 5 years that's what we have to face. Life is hard. We have a lot of challenges to face us. Everybody's life has big challenges, and anyone could be the victim of random violence or a predictable calamity. We could be shot at home while eating ice cream or go to a Bible study and get murdered. We could become so distracted ourselves that we kill an innocent person in the dawn of his or her life and spend the rest of our lives in prison. We could feel hopeless and helpless and become paralyzed in our fear of the climate changing around us, burdened with the guilt that we're not doing enough while the seas rise or the birds die out and species of both plant and animals go extinct. And still we ask God, what is it that we ought to do? What is right? How do we line up what we ought to do with what we want to do? And so, here are my suggestions. Cultivate humility, seek forgiveness and give forgiveness. Choose love and practice justice. See all others as children of God, sharing this planet. Imperfect as we are, see that we need to work together for the survival of all. I don't know where else you can find this kind of community that we have here, a community that will nurture your faith in ways that empower you to act with humility, to act in the face of injustice, to forgive and love and forgive and love. We need each other, and we need this place to keep doing what it is that we ought to be doing, to keep doing what Christians have been doing throughout the 2,000-year history of the Christian church. Forgiving and loving, teaching others, seeking wisdom from the wise ones who have been practicing forgiveness for years, praying together, celebrating with each other, sharing our joy with the world. The world needs what we have to offer. We need to be doing what we are doing right here. And to do that, we need to consider how important this place is and how many of our resources we're willing to commit in order that the work that we do here and the fun that we have and the ways that we encourage each other and the ways we learn together to forgive and love, we need to make financial contributions so this kind of life can go on in a world that is very broken and where there are not very many voices that are calling people to this kind of forgiveness and love. So, on this day that we launch our annual appeal, and we will bless God's creatures, God's animals, on this day where this gospel is particularly challenging, this is a day where we let our dollars come first, and we let that action increase our faith. Amen.